So our next speaker is Nick Jukes. Nick has been working internationally for over 25 years to enhance education and training in the life sciences through replacement of dissection and animal experiments. He co-authored the book From Guinea Pig to Computer Mouse and has helped establish a range of international resources, including a website and and libraries of alternatives. Nick is coordinator of Interniche, the International Network for Humane Education. Today, Nick will present Interniche's policy on the use of animals and alternatives in education and training, a comprehensive document that addresses all aspects of work with animals and alternatives in education and training. Please welcome Nick Jukes.
Okay, so happy to be back at the conference. Last year was my first year coming to Luxembourg, and with this presentation today, I'm going to look at one very specific aspect of animal use and alternatives within education and training. Specifically, a policy that we developed in order to help guide the development of alternatives and the replacement of animal experiments and dissection of purpose-killed animals within education and training. So our policy is a feasible but radical policy, we believe, that can encourage this replacement and the establishment of a very effective and fully ethical education system, especially within the life sciences. So just a few images, because the rest of the talk is going to be text and me speaking. There are many non-animal alternatives, such as the virtual laboratory you can see on the screen, or highly advanced training mannequins for surgical practice for veterinary students, and indeed for medical students for that matter. These are both non-animal methods. And then here we have an image from a Dutch body donation program for ethically sourced animal cadavers, where students are donated the bodies of animals that died naturally or had to be euthanized for medical reasons, in order for them to develop their skills in the field of clinical skills and surgery. And this, of course, is still an alternative because the animal was not killed for the practical class, but it does involve an animal. So the question is, how do we help guide the use of animals and alternatives, especially where there are some students, like veterinary students or some zoology students at university level, who do need hands-on experience of animals and animal tissues. It's quite a dangerous and risky area that needs to be addressed in order to guarantee that animals are not going to be harmed or killed for the sake of education. So in this presentation, I'm going to be giving you an introduction to the field of animal use and alternatives in education and training. Then an introduction to the policy itself, an overview of the policy, the different sections within it. It's quite a long policy, so much of what I say will be a summary. And then a specific look at the fields of dissection and our definition of ethically sourced for animal cadavers. After that, I'll just briefly touch on what we're developing to make version 4 of the policy at the moment, and the new sections we're going to add and other additions and edits we're going to have to it. So the field of alternatives, we focus as the International Network for Humane Education on secondary, higher and professional level animal use and alternatives, but primarily higher education. So where students of veterinary medicine and biology at university may be facing animal use or have the option provided or denied to use alternatives. So within these faculties, we have different disciplines, from anatomy and physiology to surgery. And within each of those disciplines, we have practical classes and training events where animals or alternatives can be used or may be used. Now, conventionally, the majority of animal use has been harmful. It might be the dissection of purpose-killed animals, for example, for anatomy, animal experimentation itself, so using the animal while alive, and other instrumental use that might not fit into either of those two categories. And our focus is to achieve full replacement of all harmful animal use and to ensure the implementation of high quality, effective alternatives. So it's a matter of curricular design, of defining teaching objectives and looking at learning methods that can enhance the acquisition of knowledge and skills and positive attitudes towards animals, towards the fields. So alternatives are both non-animal tools, as you saw in the photographs earlier, and fully humane approaches that might involve animals. And that would be only when the animals can benefit with specific surgery, for example, where students are also observing a surgery and participating in the surgery of an animal who is a patient and needs intervention. Or it might be neutral, for example, a body donation program. The animal is donated after genuine euthanasia into a body donation program, just like a human body donation program. And students have the opportunity to work with those animal cadavers as part of their education. So there are two areas here. Quite often people think of alternatives as only the non-animal tools. And it's certainly true that non-animal tools can replace a lot of harmful animal use and can be incredibly effective, far more effective than the harmful animal use they're replacing. But there are certain areas, like I mentioned before, in veterinary education and training, where students and trainees do need hands-on experience of animals and animal tissues. So the conventional alternative definition of being non-animal only is not sufficient when it comes to education. So our policy, this is the title of the policy. I'll be talking about version 3. And as I said, we're working on version 4 at the moment, which will just have minor changes and some additional parts. And this is the website where you can download or read the policy online. We're also working further on the new editions, new versions being in different languages, but you should be able to find various languages of the current version. So the policy we developed when we wrote our book, From Guinea Pig to Computer Mouse, the second edition, in order to make clear our position concerning animal use and that of alternatives. And it offers definitions and guidelines to ensure effective and fully ethical acquisition of knowledge and skills and attitudes. So it's really very much something that should fit perfectly into life science education and training, and meet the demands of animal rights at the same time. There doesn't need to be a difference between those two things. There doesn't need to be a conflict. It just needs a very effective thinking about how teaching objectives can be met in a fully ethical way. Quite often animals are used, and because that's so often harmful animal use, people think that there's no alternative to that, or they think if you don't have harmful animal use, you don't have any animal at all. And the policy was developed in order to help fully meet teaching objectives and fully protect animals. So it addresses all aspects of work with animals and alternatives in education and training. And we use it as a basis to promote what practical classes could be, as well as for guidelines and legislation. Some aspects of the policy have gone into new legislation in Brazil, in Serbia, in some other countries. And we've also used it as a base ourselves. But if we have funding opportunities, we're able to give grants to teachers to develop alternatives, then of course they must follow the policy too. And also for other teachers that we might be working with in different ways, they have to follow the policy. So this is a screenshot of the policy online. You can see it has hyperlinks to the different sections of the policy, but it is 10 different sections, so it's quite a large policy, and we won't be going through page by page now because of lack of time. So the policy includes a preface introducing the situation, our position statement about being behind fully ethical education and the need for replacement of all harmful animal use. We define alternatives, the different types of alternatives, from software to training mannequins, and also work with animals as patients. We define harm. It needs defining. Many people think that if you kill an animal and use it in dissection, there's been no harm. But of course, that's not true. Not only is there various pain and suffering and distress within the process of collecting the animal or breeding the animal and transporting the animal, but also the killing itself we consider a significant form of harm, the ending of a life and all the animal's potential. So we define harm, and that's a very strong and tight definition of harm. We then have a policy on animal dissection. Most dissection we consider to be of no benefit to the students, and of course animals may well be killed for the process. So we address that, and I'll be looking at that in more details shortly. We have a policy on what we call ethical sourcing of animal cadavers and organs and tissue, which feed into the policy on animal dissection, but also other areas of education too. We have a policy on other sources, other acceptable sources, which gives a minor flexibility in relation to section 5 on ethical sourcing. And I'll be looking at those two in a little bit more detail as well. Then we have a policy on live animal use within clinical skills and surgery training. For example, when is it okay for a student to be participating in a surgery on an animal patient? Where do the different sort of needs and rights of the animal and the student coincide or not? And how can that be effectively managed? And then we have a policy on live animal field studies, which is similar. When can you interact with an animal or not? When are you causing stress? When you're harming an animal or not in the field? And finally, sections 9 and 10, which then look at the production of alternatives, the production of software alternatives or preservation of animal tissue, which can, in the future, bring about a lot of further replacement of killing or harming of animals, but where animals might have been part of the production process. So, for example, the filming of an animal experiment. Would that be acceptable or not? We'd say no. The filming of a surgery on an animal patient, yes, we would say that's fine. So sections 9 and 10 reflect earlier part of the policies, but are looking specifically at the production of alternatives, which some people would not consider an ethical issue at all because of the potential for replacement, but which of course are ethical issues because animals might be part of the production process. So looking at animal dissection, specifically that policy, there's various conditions that would need to be met for animal dissection to be acceptable in our opinion. Let me just turn off this. So in most cases, we say dissection is not needed. Here you can see the full policy itself. So firstly, there's this source of the animal. Was the animal free living? Was the animal killed for the purpose or not? And we say only dissection is only necessary, only acceptable rather, when the animal cadaver is ethically sourced. Only when it's university level, so we say no to any dissection before university level, that it's relevant, and so on. So all of these issues would need, all these conditions would need to be met in order for animal dissection to be acceptable, in our opinion, within university level education. Coming in a moment onto what ethically sourced means, you'll see how that feeds into the dissection policy. So the two main issues here are the source of the animal. Was the animal free living or not? And the death of the animal. Was the animal killed for the purpose? If the animal was free living and the animal had to be put down for medical reasons or died in an accident or due to terminal disease, then we would say that animal cadaver was ethically sourced and it would be acceptable to use that animal within education. So here is the introduction and then 9 points regarding the definition of ethically sourced. And you can see in 5.1, the conditions there rule out the vast majority of animals that are used for dissection or for other purposes currently or have been in the past, because there's been a lot of very positive replacement in recent years. So if the animal was caught or bred or killed, no, it would be unacceptable. 5.2, was the animal free living? So a wild or a stray or a companion animal before death. If it wasn't free living, we would say that's not acceptable because you're contributing to the harm in some way. So therefore, an animal that came from a research facility or a farm could not be defined as ethically sourced, because the animal, the ethics were so severely compromised by the life of the animal and their potential suffering in advance. So this is only really, this is when all of these elements are fully met. It doesn't allow much room other than, for example, cats and dogs that are animal patients and couldn't be saved by a veterinarian. So typically body donation programs, for example, at Tufts University, College of Veterinary Medicine in Boston in the US, they have a very good body donation program, a veterinary teaching hospital, and people can donate the bodies of their deceased and euthanized companion animals, their pets, if the animal couldn't be saved. And those animals then are preserved or chilled and are used by students for dissection and for some surgical practice. That would be ethically sourced and that would be acceptable to us. If it was a cow from a farm, no. If it was a rat from a research facility, no. They're not ethically sourced because the source wasn't correct. And usually those animals would be killed not for the benefit of the animal. It wouldn't be genuine euthanasia. So there'd be two major conditions not met. So that's ethically sourced. We have a extra section here on other acceptable sources. And this really is a very minor flexibility in order to allow for veterinary student access to animals that are not free living. So for example, a camel. There's people across the Middle East, North Africa, where animals, where students need to work and understand the anatomy of camels, for example. How do you do that? They're all somewhere between work animals and companion animals, so they wouldn't fit fully into the ethically sourced area. So what we have here is an area where we have a little bit of flexibility. A work animal could be okay because you couldn't get a fully free living animal. But there's still no flexibility on the death. If the animal was killed for the purpose, it wouldn't fit into the policy, it wouldn't be acceptable. So the animal still had to be euthanized for medical reasons, so for its own benefit, or killed in an accident, or died because of terminal illness. So again, a very, very little bit of flexibility, but it does help students to learn about animals' anatomy and surgery in order to help other animals in the future. That's the point of their education. Here is the full policy. Sorry, have I got the wrong one here? Okay, I posted the wrong one, sorry, but the full details are up on our website. We also have a flow chart in order to help you guarantee that you're achieving ethically sourced animal cadavers or other acceptable sources. And this will explain how you can get the three options: ethically sourced, otherwise acceptable, or unacceptable. And this policy we can make available. Version 4 of the policy is something that we're working on. There will be minor additions and edits to the policy. We're adding new areas for primary and secondary education and for psychology, other areas that weren't covered in version 3. So for example, chick hatching experiments and work with children, we would say is not acceptable, but children going out to visit animals in the school pond for minor capture, minor and brief capture of the animal and return of the animal to the pond in order to learn about those animals and develop more respect for individual animals and nature as a whole, we would say is acceptable within certain conditions. So we need to add these policies. We certainly would say no dissection, and of course animal experiments cannot fit into the policy at all at that level, nor can experiments fit at university level or in research and testing. Research and testing is another area we're adding to the policy because it's important that students have job opportunities within humane science, for example, and also we need to be aware of the trajectory from humane education for children to students using only humane methods, and the potential in the future for humane science and clinical work with animals as a career. So there is a trajectory there, and we need to ensure that there is humanity and good knowledge and skills acquisition at every level throughout education into the career. So we need to have a policy on research and testing on the 3 R's of replacement, reduction, and refinement of animal experiments. For example, we focus only on replacement because we believe that's the crucial area to work on, and it's feasible and desirable. And we're adding a final new element on sustainable development, sustainability in general, and a vision for the future in terms of a much more holistic, ecological, and humane future for the students to enter into, for animals to be part of, for nature to exist. So something very positive to look at how things are changing in terms of approaches to knowledge and skills acquisition, in terms of how we work with animals, and how we value the humanity within the professions. So this is going to be, well, it's currently under discussion, and we'll be launching it later this month or in October. So those are the areas that we'll be adding to the policy, and any feedback anyone has in terms of questions about the policy or in terms of new areas we could add, I'd be very happy to hear from you on that, so that we can make sure it's a policy that really can fully meet the demands of animal rights, but also fully meet the demands of teachers and students for knowledge and skills acquisition as well. And it takes a bit of creative thinking to achieve that, but I'm a firm believer that there are plenty of possibilities to help realize a vision of a fully humane and fully ecological society and education system. It's a question of working out how exactly that can be done, of finding examples, creating examples, and demonstrating that it's possible as well. So thank you very much for listening. I'm here for questions now and for some time afterwards as well. Further information on our website there, and the policy information I sent you back a little bit earlier. So thank you very much.
Okay, Nick, thank you so much for your presentation and all the work you do. So I will start reading out the questions now that we have, and if to all the viewers, if you still have additional questions, feel free to post it in the Q&A feature so that Nick can still answer these. So let me get to the questions. Some technical difficulties here. So the first question is, how do you get in contact with scientific facilities like universities, and how is the response in your opinion? Or
I think a lot of teachers are, and many of course all should be, supportive of effective education and training. So I think once you can develop a relationship with a teacher, you might want to do that through students first, or contacting the teacher directly, and get into a discussion of how to enhance knowledge and skills acquisition. Then, and especially when you can demonstrate specific tools like some really amazing software or some wonderful training mannequins, then you can convince them, I think, that they can, that practical classes that involve harmful animal use, such as animal experiments, can indeed be replaced, and that the students will learn better. also that the teachers themselves can also pass on their knowledge and skills more effectively. So the response we've had from teachers we've worked with through our small but global network of national contacts and partners is that once you start speaking the same language as the teachers, that of teaching objectives and how effectively you can meet them, and then explore that also includes not killing, not teaching students that is an acceptable approach or going to benefit them as a veterinary student, for example, then you can get some really good connection with them, I think. And it's amazing to watch teachers change in their perspective once they realize that the real thing is not the animal experiment or the killing of an animal for dissection, but the real thing is effective acquisition of knowledge and skills. Then once that shift has happened, then it's just a question of showing the teachers what exists, connecting them to other teachers who know and have developed these alternatives and have implemented them to everyone's benefit. And then I think once you've got that, then there's no stopping the momentum.
So the next question is, what would be an ethical source of cadavers for exotic animals? An example, monkeys, big cats, veterinarians for veterinarians and rescue centers.
Yeah, it's certainly tricky when it comes to certain species. That's why we added section 6, acceptable other sources, because not everything can be ethically sourced, and vet students need to learn about specific animals that might not be available with a natural death or otherwise very widely, or certainly in certain countries. So it's very tricky. That's why dogs and cats, you can always get ethically sourced, because there's always many dogs and cats as companion animals, whereas something like a camel or a certain lizard probably wouldn't be. So it is tricky there. We would say that animal sanctuaries could actually fit into the ethically sourced area, because those animals have become like companion animals. They're no longer in farms or zoos or research facilities where the ethics would be majorly compromised by their use and their suffering. So I think going to sanctuaries is good. Also within nature, I mean, animals do sometimes die in floods or pollution incidents or whatever, and keeping an eye out for those animals. It might not be as regular as necessary, but as would be useful, but certainly preserving animals is also another way. So finding an animal cadaver, being aware, of course, of toxicity issues, and then preserving that animal can also make an animal for anatomy that is semi-permanent through plastination or through other preservation methods. If you needed a sort of freshly deceased animal, that's harder, but there are also preservation methods where the tissue stays quite soft, and clinical skills and surgery can also be practiced within a specially preserved method, through a specially preserved method. But of course, in some countries where there are more monkeys around, and we don't have any where I am wild living, but there are some in Malaysia or other countries, for example, then I think it's a question of keeping an eye out, building networks of people aware where animals might have died in accidents like electrocution, and then having a sort of method in order to collect and transport those animals that are found opportunistically, in order to then help with the training of vets or wildlife biologists. The other area, of course, is going out and helping animals as part of fieldwork studies, and certainly a sort of brief capture of an animal where you're actually going to try to benefit the individual animal as well as the species or the habitat. That could also be acceptable according to the conditions within our policy. Again, there's about 10 different conditions that would need to be met for ethical field work, but there are hands-on opportunities with animals within the fieldwork area too, as well as the clinical skills and surgery elements for students having opportunities with animal patients and helping them.
Okay, thank you. So we have one question. So it says, thank you, Nick. Could you comment a bit more on the realization of this policy? How likely and when could it be implemented?
I think we made a point of developing this policy, and it was drafted by myself and Dr. Siri Martinsen, who's our Norwegian national contact, and also the leader of NOA for animal rights in Norway. So we've got that veterinary background, we've got the policy developed in order to make it very realistic. We tried to make the policy a realistic expression of a vision of fully humane education and effective education. So I think it's perfectly feasible to have it applied in any life science course within at university level, veterinary, medical and biology. And as we explain more on the primary and secondary side as well, within those levels of education too. It also can be applied within some professional training aspects such as surgical training too. So I think it's very feasible to apply it. It looks very complicated and detailed, but there are elements that are repeated throughout the policy. And some of it's just quite common sense. There's some very clear areas such as dissection and what ethically sourced means that you'd need to sort of look at. But some of them, like the source of the animal and the death of the animal, are very simple and clear. I think the question is how is connecting with the teacher, getting a good connection, speaking the same language, explaining what the alternatives are, reminding them that it is often teachers themselves who develop the non-animal methods or who practice the approaches that do involve animals but can often benefit them individually. And so looking at the published studies that look at the advantages of all these alternative approaches. And we have a studies database and an alternatives database for free access on our website. And once you do that, also if you can demonstrate specific learning tools to the teacher, maybe lend them, we have a library of alternatives as well, then the teachers can start to spend time with the individual tools, read about the alternative approaches such as students learning and helping animals at the same time during clinics. And I think once you've got that connection, and it helps if you've got a student who knows the subject, of course, that you're working with, or you are that student, then you can help bring about the replacement sometimes with just in a very quick time scale. It could be an overnight matter, or it could be something that might take a year when the curriculum needs to be readjusted a little bit. Or perhaps a university needs a new clinic and only has a tiny one at the moment. So that's something more long scale. But there's always opportunities for students to have experience of these tools. And I think as animal campaigners also, working with and supporting those students, the ones who might conscientiously object, working with the teachers, and as I say, not sort of challenging them, but explaining how the practice can be done a little bit differently and that everyone can benefit in this way. I think then, like I say, the replacement can often happen quite quickly. But finding the teachers, finding sympathetic teachers, working with them in a very respectful way, and in a very informed way, if you can, is very important. So I think that the potential there for change is really great, but it's worth sort of having an understanding of the policy, an understanding of the alternatives that exist, and being able to argue that they are really to everyone's benefit. The animals, of course, because they're not being used harmfully. The students, because they have access to best practice learning tools and approaches. The teachers, because they can pass on their knowledge and skills more effectively. And of course, the professions, because better trained students will be entering the professions. And that has impact beyond the profession, in fact, even right across society as well.
Yes.